Dr. Boston has a very interesting resume, and I found it fascinating because it's one of my favorite topics. Dr. Amanda Boston is an assistant professor of Africana Studies at the University of Pittsburgh. Her research, writing, and teaching focus on 20th century and contemporary African American history, politics, and popular culture. Her current projects explore gentrification's racial operations in her hometown of Brooklyn, New York, and their role in the making and unmaking of the borough's Black communities. Dr. Boston holds a PhD and an MA in Africana Studies from Brown University, as well as an MA in Political Science and BA in Political Science and African American Studies from Duke University. Welcome to the set, Dr. Boston.
Thank you very much. It's good to join you guys. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. I love, like I said in the opening, I love your field of work, Africana Studies at the University of Pittsburgh. Hey, tell us, what inspired you to go into that field and get your degrees in that field?
Sure. I think like a lot of students, I was really inspired by an undergraduate professor I had at Duke University. My very first class freshman year was with a brilliant professor, Mark Anthony Neal, 8:45 Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And just from the very first class, he just blew my mind, right? All these things that had kind of been had definitely been celebrated sort of in my family and with my parents, right? We grew up very, proud Black family, knew all the heroes and lots of history and took great pride in that. But I think encountering it at the university level of study, right? It just became more sophisticated. It gave me a way to understand, right, things about my life that I took for granted as part of just really an incredible people, an incredible global history of Black struggle and triumph. So that's what really sort of motivated me to keep on going.
So your interest in African Black studies and Africana studies, that happened before you went to the university? Or was that, were you inspired or excited about that before you went to the university, or was it solidified or even thought of after you started attending the university?
Well, I think I didn't know what I was going to major in. Again, like a lot of students, right? I
Right.
knew I wanted to take this intro to African American studies. So I picked the class, right? But I didn't know that, instantly I was going to decide, okay, this is going to be one of my majors. So, yeah.
Okay. So, wow, this is incredible. Now, fast forward and going into your teaching, uh, do you feel that your students are as inspired as you are? Or is there an excitement in it that they want to learn more and more and more about it?
I think many are. Some, of course, it's like I do realize, hey, I'm kind of a nerd, right? I decided that I loved school so much that I wanted to get 4 degrees and that sort of thing, right? So, but many are excited about it. I'm at a public university. Pitt has like something like 30,000 students or something.
Hmm.
Many are from sort of rural Pennsylvania, places there aren't many Black people at all, much less Black teachers teaching Black subjects. So a lot of them are also grateful for the opportunity to just learn this stuff, to have a Black professor, a Black woman professor, a young Black woman professor in the classroom. So there's definitely a lot of excitement.
Hmm. And how long have
From
you been
students.
teaching? How long have you been doing this?
Well, I've been at Pitt since fall 2021,
Hmm.
but I got my PhD almost 7 years ago. So
Amazing.
I started teaching when I was in grad school, but sort of full-time professor, 2021.
That's outstanding. I'm gonna toss it over. I'm not gonna hog the entire conversation, so I'm gonna toss it over to Brother Hicks.
Yes, thank you again. And Dr. Boston, thank you very much for being on the show. I wanted to give proper respect to you and your title, basically, because you're putting the effort to obtain the level of doctor. And that is something that should be recognized.
No,
So,
no
first
offense
and
is taken.
foremost,
The PhD is earned, but you can call me Amanda. That's fine. Thank you.
thank you. Um, Amanda, say for instance, we were trying to find out, what led you to going down the path of making sure the importance of doing Africana studies. And what got your interest first and foremost?
Well, first and foremost, I was just raised in a loving Black home with loving Black parents who thought it was important for me to know my history and to be proud of it, right? So it began there, right? And then once I had sort of educational opportunities to take advantage of, I did that. And then, that sort of snowballed and continued. But the roots of it, it all started at home, for sure.
Definitely. And the importance of everybody knowing their history and knowing basically the culture of where we came from is, and that's really crucial, especially nowadays where there are so many people who are trying to whitewash our history. It's
Absolutely.
very important to make sure that we maintain that, and not just in the classroom, but also at home. It really starts at home.
Definitely. And what you're saying is very true about the current sort of political context, but I remind my students, even in our very first classes in intro, like Black studies has always been under attack, right? Black people have always had to rewrite their history and prove that, when slavery was happening, we were fighting it, right? That we weren't happy on the plantation, right? That we had a history, that slavery didn't destroy our history, or that, African history was something that we had a relationship to and wanted to be proud of, right? And so, and I mean, Black studies is something that was fought for at HBCUs and at predominantly white institutions. And so I think, I have to remind folks, it's a long battle. This didn't start with Ron DeSantis a couple years ago, right? Our history and
Mhm.
basically anything that asserts that Black people have something of value to offer the world
Mhm.
has been under attack, since 1492. So yeah, this is a long fight.
Absolutely. And we definitely have people here who are continuing to make sure that we are still in this fight, but also maintaining our history and our knowledge of who we are is definitely part of being self-determined, but also self-knowledgeable, enlightened, if you will.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Tiffany?
Before I ask any questions, I wanted to, on behalf of Rock, she wanted me to tell you that your godmother, she says hello, and she says that Raleigh grad of Swing Five sends their regards.
Yes. So my godmother is a proud member of Swing Fi Swing. I love her dearly. My mom is a proud member of Swing Fi Swing. So I grew up loving and admiring and respecting swing women and their groove, swing sisters rather, and their groove brothers, for
Yeah,
sure.
thank you. Okay, got that out the way. Let's see here. Okay, so one of the questions that I have is, what is the significant difference between the Africana and African American studies?
Sure. So, these departments have a lot of names, right? Some are Black studies, some are Afro-American, African American, and it really, it's about the geography, right? So, for example, a lot of times an African American studies department will tend to think of it as focused on the United States specifically,
Mhm.
whereas Africana is Black folks in the Caribbean, in Africa, in the US, in Europe, wherever they might be, right? Also, when you think of something like Black studies, being like the racial category of Black is really a product of the colonial encounter,
Mhm.
right? So it's the modern world. Whereas in Africana studies, you might have something that goes, further back in time before the colonial encounter. So all those names kind of, they're about the geography and the scope, the temporal scope of what's studied in those departments.
Okay, awesome. Um, William, do you want to come back around? Because I have other questions as well.
No, continue.
Okay, forgive me, my eye is watering. With your political science degree, do you see yourself going into politics? If so, in what areas would you serve? Or maybe not?
No, so not electoral politics, right? But I think,
Oh, boy.
we do political work in a lot of ways, right? So for example, kind of, building off of Robert's earlier question, teaching is political, right? And so I think that yeah, I'm not really interested in running for anybody's political office at this very moment.
Okay.
But I think again, there are ways to be political, to do political work, to resist and all that kind of thing. So I think it's important to recognize that there are different ways to engage in politics.
Okay. Because, you can always join, Jasmine's team, Jasmine Crockett. She's, out there.
Oh,
Running.
yes.
Or we can always use your assistance on the school board. That's important.
That is true. Department of Education right now. So that's a good point. In what condition do you see the country being in within the next 5 to 10 years? Also, would the Black and brown people be better or worse off within the next 5 to 10 years?
Those are some big questions. So let me pull out my crystal ball. So in terms of the state of the country, I think we're already starting to see these pushes toward defunding, right, that are disadvantaging all of us in terms of our ability to produce knowledge, to share knowledge. We're seeing, in terms of health sciences, these defunding has it has effects for scientific research on finding cures to certain things, right? Our diplomatic ties. And so I'm definitely concerned about the future for all of us, including Black and brown folks, especially Black and brown folks, because when it rains on everybody else, it tends to pour on us. Right. So I think it's totally legitimate to be concerned about where we'll be. But thankfully, we also have very strong histories of resistance and struggle, right? We've been through Reconstruction and so on and so forth, and the Nadir and, the backlash after Brown v. Board and the Civil Rights Movement. And we're still dealing with some of that, right? And so it's going to get tough, but we're tough too, right? And so I think that we can hold both of those truths. And in terms of what's going on with Black and brown folks, we're, again, that just what I said about that backlash. I think a lot of the policies that we're seeing, whether it's, stopping affirmative action, these questions around birthright citizenship, because remember that is something that was granted to freedmen after the Civil War, right? So a lot of these resentments and these ideas about who does or doesn't belong in our national community, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is racially based, right? And so we're definitely going to see a lot of ways that we're marginalized in the next 5 years, but we'll continue to fight.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent questions. And Dr. Boston, I could definitely see you in politics. We need more honest politicians there. And I could see you teaming up with Jasmine Crockett too. Boy, that would be something they could not handle. And that is the truth, you see.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure. You talked earlier, I saw your bio that you sent about your work back in New York and your studies back in New York. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit about that? And if that's something that should be or could be maybe a model for the country?
Sure. So I'm a very proud Brooklynite, right? Most people who know me know very quickly that I was born and raised in Brooklyn. And I started my PhD program at Brown just a few weeks before the Barclays Center opened. And I actually grew up very close to the Barclays Center arena in Brooklyn, where the Nets and the New York Liberty play. And just seeing that project open and all the fanfare surrounding it showed me that, okay, this is not just that annoying project that happened 15 minutes away from me. This is something that's major and something we need to pay attention to. So that motivated my decision to study it more in depth. The books that I was reading about gentrification, about Brooklyn, well, the books about gentrification in New York was really focused on Harlem for reasons that we understand, right? Harlem is still the capital of African America, even in the midst of gentrification, probably the most famous Black neighborhood in the world. But, that meant that Brooklyn wasn't really in the literature on gentrification, Black Brooklyn specifically, right? So gentrification literature in Brooklyn was really focused on kind of Brooklyn Heights, Williamsburg, right? Places that were gentrified much earlier when Black neighborhoods were still neighborhoods of last resort. And so it was really about sort of putting my community on the map and being a voice for them. And that motivated, my ongoing efforts to write my book, but also, articles that I've written and other research that I've engaged in along the way.
I look at it, and especially with this current administration, want to get rid of anything that's Black. Everything is DEI, and it tells me that they really don't know what it is, especially the less educated ones. I think the educated ones do know, but they're trying to turn it into something as a bad word or bad thing and this type of thing. Uh, my other question to you is that when do you think that it's really when they try to deny and defund and get rid of our history, uh, can you just talk to us about what do you, aren't they really harming themselves? Because if you look at our history with all of our inventions, our research, um, teachings, and building and everything, I see that they seem to be shooting themselves in their own foot. What do you say about that?
Absolutely. I think, you know, it's cliche, but knowledge really is power. I mean, in terms of, you know, Black studies and what potential there exists when Black people know our proud history, when white people know the terrible things that have happened in this country, but also that they have traditions of resistance and allyship. And, you know, when people know that when you take certain things away and think it's only going to harm Black people, that it harms you too, right? That sort of knowledge and awareness is key, not just to sort of factual knowledge, but also empathy with folks, right? And understanding that our fates are linked. And I think that all of those things to crack down on, you know, knowledge, not just around Black history, but on, you know, knowledge of marginalized folks in terms of our LGBTQ siblings, right? Of women's knowledge and women's stories, right? So it's not just Black folks, but for a lot of folks, they're sort of fixated on, well, as long as it's hurting them, then this is all right. But we all end up suffering. And that's the case for education. Again, we talked about those cuts in medical research and so on and so forth. So that absolutely has real ramifications for folks that they oftentimes don't anticipate when they're supporting these sorts of officials and policies.
Absolutely, and you look at all of the things. I'm trying to, and you could probably just spew it right off the top of your head. The Black woman that made it easy for our space flights when she went to NASA and actually figured out the way to navigate through space.
Is it Katherine Johnson, Hidden Figures?
I think you're right about that. I think you're right about that. You look at the traffic lights, for instance. I mean, we can go on and on. The first open heart surgeries. Look how many people that were saved. You can talk about Charles Drew, you know, and blood plasma. That's so much. And I think that if our children, those stories can inspire anyone, especially our children. Do you find that, say, when you're teaching, and let's say someone came into your class and they had a different major, have you changed anyone's major, helped them change their major because they were excited about this new information that you were teaching?
I would definitely say so. At least I make them take more, inspire them to take more classes with me. So, I mean, there are folks whose minds are definitely blown who, you know, and that's again, one of the reasons education is so important, because there's a thirst for knowledge. There are folks who are just waiting, but don't know where to start. Right. And so as a professor, it's my job to sort of get folks interested in learning more. Right. And so I think I definitely have done that work. My colleagues try to do it every day with topics, with issues and themes facing Black folks around the world.
Robert?
Absolutely. I would say also, with the advent of history just basically being our history woven into the fabric of America, I can basically say that stuff that can never be removed, it can never be replaced. Although some people would say that, oh, we never made any contributions to society as a whole. But believe it or not, if it wasn't for us, a lot of things that are out here right now, some of the things we take for granted, they would be completely gone.
Yeah, I mean, they were saying we didn't have anything to offer when we were literally building the nation. So that is a tale as old as time, right? This idea that Black folks have not contributed to America in any significant way.
Really?
So that's something we've been dealing with.
Yeah.
And we hate to basically continually to say this, but it is true. and people are have to realize repetition is important. Just as much as many other people listen to whatever is out there and they hear the news over and over and over again until it eventually becomes ingrained in their mind, the same thing has to be said for our history. It has to keep going and going and going and going, sent by generation after generation after generation, to keep our stories and keep our history alive. Because that's how we learned, based upon first-hand experience from our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, and being able to see what they went through, hear what they went through, and really take into consideration how we have become where we are today because of that. And like women like yourself, Dr. Boston, who continue to be in the classroom, teaching our children, teaching our students the importance of this history, and making sure that people never forget it. Everybody says about 9/11, always remember. We have to always remember our history.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I
Thank you.
find, I find that there are people out here that wants to rewrite history, and they continuously vote against and go against their own interests. I mean, we see the state of affairs here now. I hope I hope someone puts the brakes on this. But I want your idea, or you're thinking about this, the danger of rewriting history or watering down history, or erasing history. Just like in Florida, I think there are three versions of oh my God, the name escapes me right now, of oh my goodness. Everyone knows who I'm talking about. I don't know. I'm rarely lost for words, but right now, who got arrested for riding on the bus?
Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks. I knew that. There were three versions in Florida of that story. I find that astounding because we go to school, and I remember being in high school, especially. In order to graduate, I had to know history. I had to learn history. And I'm thinking now, how much of that history is false? And the dangers of teaching the wrong history. And you have to, I can understand how you have to go to school, pass the class, and everything that you learned was a lie. I mean, that's kind of crazy. Not everything, but maybe watered down or manipulated in a way that it's really not true. But yet you're required to pass that.
Right. I mean, there were a lot of, even beyond Florida, right? Even in New York, there were there were protest actions on sort of public transportation around segregation and stuff. So, I think when it comes to something like the Montgomery bus boycott, right? It's kind of like, okay, we can't teach every single time somebody demonstrated, in that way, right? And so there is sort of a utility to teaching maybe one thing, even if you can't teach them all. But it's a totally different matter to say this is the only time it happened, right? Or that this never happened here, or we, because we never had Jim Crow in New York, that means we had no racial discrimination, right? And so it's definitely important to kind of decide or to examine, what stories are told and why not, and who is advantaged, basically, who has an advantage when those stories aren't told, for sure.
Right. That's right. Oh, welcome to the set. Another one of our swing sisters, that's Nikaya Watts. Hey, Nikaya, I want you to meet Dr. Amanda Boston.
Hi, Amanda. It's a pleasure to meet you.
You as well.
Yes. What questions do you have? I'm not sure whether you saw the resume I sent or not on Dr. Boston. She's
no, I didn't get a chance to, so I'm gonna sit back for a minute and let some questions formulate naturally.
Okay. Well, briefly, she is right now. She is the assistant professor at the University of Pittsburg in Africana Studies. Okay, and that means and we temporarily asked you the question earlier. What's the difference in Africana Studies and African Studies? Or
Sure. So similar to what I said before, it's about geography and time and all those sorts of different approaches to the study of Black folks. So if I'm doing African studies, then I'm really focused on the continent, right? And that's that. Whereas Africana, it can be people of African descent around the world. So that's probably the primary difference between the two disciplines.
Okay. And we also covered the motivating factors and how people can get motivated by, if you know your own history, and the importance of that. And we saw each week, you and Tiffany and Robert can tell you how our objective is to motivate something through the special guests as yourself come on. And it could be anything from architecture to medicine to business and last week we had a music artist on. So we covered the gambit. And talking about, you mentioned earlier about they saying, well, you guys haven't contributed anything, and they're sitting in that White House that we built, the traffic light that was invented, and our strides and discoveries in medicine, and it's all over the place, we can even talk about how the Moors taught the Europeans, they even taught them how to bathe, so that's the gist of it. So I'm gonna go back to Tiffany right now. Then, Nakai, if you have a question, you can jump right in. Tiffany.
So, by you teaching African American studies, I just came across an article where it says something along the lines of "We were the first Irish," because this is the month of March, and I didn't read the article, but I just saw the headline. And I was like, well, that kind of makes sense because I personally believe that we are the first of everything, honestly. Like they said that we were the first Chinese, we were the first, Aboriginals, so on and so forth. And just because, before the continents had split or, there was like this one big area. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, because you're talking about geography and you're talking about the times. And so I was just like, I wish I would have read it, but that just kind of crossed my mind.
I wish you had read it too, because I'm like, we the first Irish, what? But no, I mean, you're right in that human life originated in Africa, right? And so then there are a series of migrations, some breaks in the actual physical structure of continents and Earth and stuff like that. But I would definitely need more context to understand the phrase, we are the first Irish.
Yeah, I mean, and then I kind of like just sitting thinking about it. I'm thinking about, because Black and brown people, especially, us, we come in different shades, right? Like, I think about some of the Black people that comes with the ginger hair naturally, like they're born with that hair color, and they don't have it, like their parents didn't have it or their grandparents didn't have it. So I'm like, okay, or with a different eye color, you know what I'm saying, that is not known throughout their generations. So it kind of puzzled me. But by this being also, this is Women's History Month. Because I wish I would have thought about this earlier. This is Women's History Month. I would like to ask you, is there a particular woman that you studied or that you looked up to, whether it was in your studies or while you was in school or just in general, like, that you actually studied before?
Sure. So I will say it's interesting that you brought up race and, well, you brought up the Irish, us and the Irish, and a lot of people don't realize sort of that the Irish folks were sort of the first racialized people, right? The ideas about race that were practiced on Black people during colonialism and slavery are first exercised by the British against the Irish, right? This idea of the savage, the wild Irish, right? That those ideas about racial difference and, inherently being inferior and savage and all that. Again, that's something that the British first practice on them. Then they export those ideas to the colonies and on us. So there is an interesting link between us and the Irish, but I would need you to check out that article a little more before I make any clear connections. But in terms of Women's History Month, I mean, someone I always teach and enjoy teaching about is Ida B. Wells. I mean, she is just incredible. Thinking of, She's born right after slavery. She loses her parents at a young age.
I'm hearing some
She
background noise here. Okay. No, continue,
Sorry
please.
about that. Yeah, she is inspired to when her friends are killed. Unfortunately, they have a grocery store that has a white competitor, and they're lynched essentially. And she makes her life's work to crusade against lynching. And she uses social scientific research, right? Like she goes throughout the South and investigates and gathers data, and she goes around the world telling the world about the horrors of lynching. And she just lives an incredible life, right? She's a journalist, she's an anti-lynching crusader. She's just a racial justice warrior, and she's determined to set the record straight about Black people and about the horrors that have been visited upon us. And I think her life is just incredible.
Yeah. Some of the famous Black women that I had noticed in history, because I do it on other platforms as well. Like you said, Ida B. Wells. And we have Shirley Chisholm, one of my favorite people. I used to love to
Brooklynite.
speak. You're smiling when I mention Shirley Chisholm.
A Brooklynite, yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks. So Jonah, I don't know. I'm getting a lot of background here. Okay. Tamara Burke. I'm sorry, what did you say?
Oh, I was about to say, I can jump in while we deal with the technical difficulties and the gremlins and the walls. But I just wanted to basically say, tell us a little bit about about, say, for instance, where you were growing up in Brooklyn. As a Bronxite myself, have that kinship a little bit. But just say, for instance, what were some of the things that you saw, Dr. Boston, when you were going through Brooklyn that kind of formed who you are today?
Sure. Well, I think one of the main things I talk about when I talk about my research or when I'm back in Brooklyn is I recall that Brooklyn is home to one of the largest contiguous Black communities in the United States, right? There are more Black folks in Brooklyn than there are, people of any background in cities like Washington, D.C., right? Like it's basically a Black metropolis living in Brooklyn. And it's also a global, like it's a really diasporic Blackness. So, one of the largest Caribbean populations outside the Caribbean, for example. So I just grew up surrounded by Black folks from all around the world. And I think that that's a nervous tick. That definitely has shown me it's given me a rich appreciation of Blackness in all of its various forms. It taught me, early solidarity, right? To see Black folks and see friends and community members rather than foes and competitors, right? And so I think that absolutely shaped who I am, how I operate, and my passion for Black studies, right? Our global heroes, like not just the US, but thinking of, the Garveys, the Mandelas, and Claudia Jones, and so on and so forth, right? Black folks from around the world. So that's probably one of the more critical aspects of my upbringing, right? Living in Black communities, meeting Black people from all walks of life. And I think that was and I mean, being from the Bronx, that as well, right? All the incredible, hip hop can only be born in a place like New York City, right? Because it has all of that Black community, that Blackness from around the world that is so alluring and exciting and dynamic. So that definitely, having that as the backdrop of my upbringing absolutely motivated me to continue on the path that I'm on.
Okay. Now, Nikaya.
Yes. I heard you guys talk about background noise, so I wasn't sure if it was me. So let me mute myself just in case.
Okay. No, you're good. Okay. What questions would you have for Dr. Boston, or do you have, rather?
I would like to ask, what are some of the key themes or topics that are commonly explored in Africana studies?
Sure. It's definitely the Black experience sort of since colonialism, right? So kind of 15th century on, a lot of it is about the struggles that we faced, whether that means, again, slavery, colonialism, Jim Crow, apartheid, and so on and so forth. but it's also about the ways that we've survived, right? The worlds that we've made, the connections that we've formed, the places and institutions that we've built, the cultures we developed and shared, right? So it's a lot of the structure, kind of the world, right? And the systems of power that we contend with every day, but it's also the ways that we've made other world in spite of those structures. So that could be, in my own classes, for example, I'll teach in Introduction to Africana Studies, right? Some of the themes I discuss include.
Oh boy, she froze on us. Hopefully that'll catch up. Okay. See, this happens when you have a valuable and interesting conversation going on,
Latin
right?
America. Oops, sorry.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
I hear you, yeah.
All right, I'm sorry about that. So in my introductory class, for example, I'll talk about, just the fight for Black studies in the 60s, right? The fight to create these departments. I'll talk about Africa and Latin America, right? I'll talk about Haiti, the Haitian Revolution, race and public health, some of the other themes, contemporary African politics. So it's a range of projects from around the world that I'll really teach about in my courses.
That's great. And it's so much that you can talk about and teach in that study alone. I can only imagine we need that like across all spectrums and all states.
I think so too. But on that note, something I've been thinking about, and of course I earned all these fancy degrees, but we're seeing this fight against Black history that's going to affect some schools. Some of my colleagues at the college level aren't able to teach the way they want to, but thank goodness, right, that Black history is not contained to the ivory tower, right? That people with PhDs aren't even the majority of historians in the Black community, right? This is always what we do in the ivory tower, so to speak, has always been part of a larger project that's also taking place in communities, right? In local libraries, in those family histories. Earlier, Robert was talking about, storytelling and story keeping by your grandparents, right? So all of us have a role to play in terms of keeping and creating and preserving history that, whatever governor or president can't stop with some sort of legal mandate. So it's important to recognize the communal nature of Black history.
Actually, you're like right on point, because that was going to be my next question too, about storytelling and trying to preserve, the African diaspora cultures. I think that's important. I think that in American history, in history in general, African and Africana studies need to be included in that, whether they're trying to take it out or not. I think they're trying to take it out just to hide realities that was included in that. But I think for us in our culture, we need to know the front end of our history and make sure that it's being told correctly and accurate.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about, and that's the gist of this whole platform that we use right now, and that is to teach and inspire someone. And I get, anytime I hear something about going back in history and read about the things that Black people have accomplished, I get excited about that. Before I go to my next question, then my next question is, how many books do you have out? How many books have you written?
Currently 0. I'm working on my first book.
Yes, we can't wait for it to come out. We can't wait for it to come out. Can your students that you have taught, and I wish I was in your class. I wish, because I get excited every time I hear this. Have you had students that come back and say, Dr. Boston, I really appreciate what you have done, what you taught me, and it inspired me to do X, Y, Z. Do you have students like that have come back to you and thanked you for the class?
Yes, I've also had students, in the reviews anyway, they'll write that they didn't expect to learn anything, right? But they walked away with a lot. Because, again, there's a misperception that, that our history is not really substantive, right? That it's not a critical history that's worth serious consideration. So when I give them the real stuff, right? Because my attitude is, if we're gonna get in trouble, we might as well be doing what we're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like we might as well, go all out. So, when they come to the class, they're oftentimes surprised by the sort of depth and rigor of Black history, Black studies, globally. But yeah, students have, come to me about maybe pursuing graduate study on their own, picking up a major or minor. So definitely they've come and, their interest has been piqued.
Mm-hmm. And I guess in your class, like you talk about the population of the University of Pittsburgh, and it's predominantly white. Is that correct? Predominantly white.
Yes, it is.
Do you have a lot of white students that sign up for your class?
I would say my students are mostly white.
Wow. And the feedback you get, have their perspective changed after they have how much have their perspective changed? Because it has to change. Once you know the truth and you understand the truth, then your mind is going to change somehow. And have you noticed how their perspective have changed about, say, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that Black people had accomplished all of this. I mean, do you get a lot of feedback that way or from that? Yeah, your screen froze again. Oh boy, technology is great when it works. Okay.
So you were asking me if I've changed my students' minds.
Yeah, if their minds have been changed based on what they've learned and getting a different perspective on how brilliant we are.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's more, I think because Black history is really more than just highlighting the good things Black folks have done.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Some of it is highlighting laws that make it possible for certain inequality to exist. So, for example, when I'm teaching about the New Deal, I talk about how FDR had to make certain concessions to powerful Democrats in the Senate who were Dixiecrats, right? So that means that when Social Security legislation first comes out, domestic workers and agricultural workers are left out, which, what do you think, most Black folks were doing in the 30s, right? Black women are working in white folks' houses, right? And Black men are working and women are in the South working in agricultural jobs, right? So the history I share is, again, it's important highlighting the Ida B. Wells and Madam C.J. Walkers, right? But it's also helping folks make sense of what is going on today. And so folks, I mean, Black and white, because that's another thing. There's some Black folks who think they just born getting an A in Africana studies because they Black.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, honey, I got this degree because I studied for a very long time in some very serious schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think my Black and my white students have work to do, which is fine because you're not born knowing anything, right? Everything. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people's minds are blown. Like when I talk about the war on drugs, these 18-year-old kids, they've never heard about the war on drugs,
Mm-hmm.
So it's just definitely a lot of ideas that I share that are brand new to them. And they appreciate getting to talk about it in a serious, extended way with other curious minds, because unfortunately, once they leave my class, once they leave the university, there are not a lot of spaces to do that in an informed and rigorous way.
Interesting. Robert?
I would say nothing else to add to that statement. I say that is definitely very telltale in itself. I definitely say that.
It is fascinating. Oh, let's see, who dropped off? Was that Nikaya? I think she dropped off. Hey, Tiffany?
Yes, I do have a question. With everything that's going on with the current state of the country right now, I was on Instagram the other day and I saw that there's a particular area, I think it's called Castleberry in Atlanta, where it is majority Black owned businesses and they're doing relatively well for themselves. And I was going through the comments and some of the comments were like, I'm glad that we're doing this, but I wish that we wouldn't broadcast it to social media. In other words, like, we don't need to make ourselves a target for, people of non-color. So, like, we should just keep some of this stuff to ourselves. What is your stance on that? Do you think, like, the stuff that we do such as creating these, I guess you can say, like these newer Black Wall Streets. Should we just, keep it in-house and not broadcast it to social media? Because we don't, I get both sides. Like we don't need to make ourselves a target, but it's like at the same time, it's like you got to get the information out to the people as well. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there is a legitimate fear, a historically grounded fear, right? When we think about, the Tulsa Race Massacre or later destruction of business districts, Black business districts specifically around the country, right? There's a fear because a lot of the violence that has historically been committed against us, the laws that have, kind of pushed us in, right, are about preventing that as backlash to our success, right? So I can definitely understand, especially now, right, when there's such a deliberate and clear targeting of, even Black folks who quote unquote do things the right way. And so I definitely think there's some merit to the idea of, some things are just for us, quote unquote. But I would never want to put a ceiling on someone's aspirations. In terms of, maybe they want to develop into a national brand, right? And don't want to just keep the word in the community, right? And so I think some of that is just about using discretion and knowing when and how to keep certain things quiet and when and how to, shout things from the rooftops.
In other words, let's have a strategy about that. I tell you, I since this is a Black-owned station, and I have no problems. I have some white co-hosts on certain shows and stuff like that, and I make it a point that I talk about us. I talk about the things that we do because a lot of people aren't educated on what we do. A lot of them are, and the ones that are, they want us to be quiet. And so my take is, I'm not, I don't go around pounding my chest, yeah, we did this, but I want people to be educated because I find that a lot of people, like you said, in your classroom, their minds are changed once they know the truth. And there's always, to me, value in truth. Whatever is true, we need to know that, and we need to prepare for that. And this is just my opinion. I don't have a fear of telling a white person that they're wrong, and let me educate you on this. I'm not doing it in a hostile way, but I'm saying what you're saying, though, that's not factually correct. Okay, let's check out this and maybe pull up an article or go back to something that I know to be true in history. So that's my take on that. I'm gonna go to Nakaya next. Nakaya.
So I know we have about 10 minutes left. So I would like to say, or I'd like to ask, what can we do as panelists right now to get Africana studies out there across the country? Because I don't believe in, we have African American studies, but even with that, that's being limited. It's not a full in-depth storytelling, giving all the history. I think it's limited to a systemic platform or agenda in a sense. So how can
the field of African American studies?
Yeah.
Oh no. So I think so. This is like there's kind of a war, just like there's diaspora wars. Sometimes there's a feeling that African American studies, if it just focuses on North America, then it's like provincial, that it's like limited. But I think African American studies and what Black people in the US have done in history is just across all ranges of life is just so incredible and vibrant. And you could devote a field of study in academic department just to African American studies and it'd be rigorous, right? So I don't feel like Africana studies is better than African American studies, or I just think it's a different approach that's in more expansive in certain kinds of ways, but definitely doesn't diminish, I think, what the field does any more than, a Caribbean studies department would be inferior to Africana studies because it's about that degree of specialization. They can go in depth more into what's going on in the Caribbean region than maybe an Africana studies department that needs to be able to touch on Europe, needs to be able to touch on the Caribbean, needs to be able to touch on African America, right? And so I think it's just different approaches.
Mhm.
right? But it's the same goal in mind, right? Which is liberation. And so I think that's the most crucial part.
Oh, really? Robert?
But I want to answer Nakaya's initial question. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just didn't want to, we can't go too hard on my colleagues in African American
Oh no,
studies,
you're
but
good.
I think what we, I think you all can do great work by continuing to invite different speakers, right? To invite because, like I said, Africana studies, yes, that's just one part of the story about preserving and disseminating our history. Get some Black librarians in here, get some Black museum staff in here who can talk about what it means to build an archive, how ordinary folks, right, are your listeners, my students and their families can go about collecting and sharing that history. Maybe some folks who are, we don't, unfortunately, Jet, Ebony, the Chicago Defender, all that kind of stuff isn't what it used to be, right? So getting some of those, people who are doing local work in the Black press, right? Those history makers, history keepers, all of them can kind of be at this table. So thank you for having this platform.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Hey, Robert, I believe last year, going back several months now, we had a guest on, and she was a photographer. And I think she focused in on, and I, s- she was from New York too, also, I believe. And, and she would take
Correct.
pictures and and she would have an archive. I mean, just different pictures going all the way back into the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and just she would go around and take pictures of various Black businesses and things of that nature. And I found that was oh, Cheryl Miller. Hey, thanks, Rock. She's on it. That was Cheryl Miller. And I thought that was fascinating too. So now, Rock, I'm sorry, Robert. Oh, speaking of Rock,
Yes,
I
Rock first. I'll yield my time to Sister Rock.
Sister Rock is not on the panel, but she's in the background there. But I want to thank her so much because this program and this platform wouldn't be what it is without her. She schedules all the guests and from all over, and I think we're booked all the way up to June almost. And just a fantastic job, Rock. Really appreciate that. Now, Robert, we've got 6 minutes. You and then Tiffany.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Boston, for being here today. And I think one of the things that we probably should also do is how about reading to our children, visiting the libraries. Yes, libraries still exist out there, but spending the time to be able to read various different books about our history to them at a reasonable age for their understanding and based upon that level, so that they'll begin to at least hear in the beginning what it is about their culture, their history. So they don't have to look at it from a washed view or biased view. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, absolutely. And, I have a nephew who I love dearly. He's just 3, but trust, he had those baby books with Black protagonists and books about fighting the power as a toddler and all that. And so those books are available and we can look for them and we can write them. We can write the stories that we want to see and don't see. So absolutely. And I had the great fortune of actually getting to sit down with a member of the Little Rock Nine, Minnie Jean Brown Triggy, a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that I spoke with her about was how do Black parents create strong Black children under Jim Crow,
Mm.
right? You're walking around with these troopers around you with bayonets because you all are so hated, but you're walking around with your heads up and you're smiling. What did your parents do to make that possible? And it started with, as children, teaching them that they were beautiful, getting Black dolls so that, they again, they knew they were beautiful and had positive associations between, the Blackness they saw around them and themselves, right? So it all begins very young, from infancy, really.
I saw something. It was a clip, I think it was on Facebook, and it was this white mom, and she had her daughter with her, and they went shopping for a doll, and the little white girl picked up the Black doll. That's what she wanted. Okay, and they took it to the counter to check out, and the cashier says, "Are you sure this is the doll you want?" implying that, hey, there are white dolls over there too. And the mom said, no, this is what my daughter wants. And my head goes off to that mom, because she's not teaching racism and hatred and bigotry and things like that. And so I'm thinking about that cashier, no, I'm really not thinking about her, but I'm thinking about what she said and what she was implying. Tiffany, we have a few minutes. What do you have?
Yeah, I saw that same video that you saw, William. And the reason why that little white girl chose that black doll is because she was like, yeah, because this is what I want to be. And she had, what doctors wear around their neck. I forgot the proper term. I think it's stethoscope.
Stethoscope. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And so she saw like a representation of what she wanted to be. And so, yeah, I saw that. My last question to you is, out of all the countries, and there are so many, is there one that stands out to you that you would recommend and be like, hey, you guys, like, you really have to go visit this country? Just because, the history or whatever it may be pertaining to our culture. Was there one, or, a couple?
Related to Black history and culture?
Yes, ma'am.
You mean, I think the U.S. has incredibly beautiful and diverse Black cultures, even in our one country, right? We know even the food is different from region to region, from city to city, and the accents and so on, and the music. So if not the U.S., I would say someplace I want to visit one day. I know, things are difficult there, but Haiti, just given that proud history of the country and the role it's played in terms of world history and Black history, I think is incredible. And one day I would like to go.
Awesome.
Right. The first successful slave rebellion in the New World, right?
Right.
First Black Republic. I think that is such a powerful history that I think we can lean on and feel empowered by.
Awesome. Thank you.
And speaking of Haiti, I remember, what was that? Was that in Ohio, where there's a small town where the Haitians went and migrated there and revitalized the city until these people that's occupying the White House now said, well, they were eating dogs and cats, which I thought was atrocious. But no, they are strong. The culture is rich there, and just incredible, incredible people. Nakai, we've got 1 minute.
I don't have anything right now. It's just, you got me thinking. One, Tiffany was just thinking about all the countries to visit, and you sit back and you think about it. You're like, Africa is a huge continent, and it has so many countries in there, and I want to visit them all. I wish I could, but yeah, it does put things into perspective. So, Doctor, I greatly thank you for coming on and enlightening us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's been an incredible hour here. And I thank you so much for taking your time out to do this. My last question is, what's the one question that you wish that we had asked that we didn't? Dr. Boston.
Ooh. I don't even, what music am I listening to right now? I don't know.
Okay. What music?
I don't know. Y'all asked some great questions. Maybe, yeah, you touched on my teaching, my research, my upbringing, my education. So you all had just really great questions for sure.
And what music are you listening to right now?
Ooh, there's a group, No Worries. And I've just been listening to them. They released an album, I think, last summer. So I've been listening to, it's like a nice R&B kind of vibe.
And the group is called No Worries?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know anything about that. And we do music shows here several days during the week. So we would invite you to tune in sometime and share with your friends.
I sure will.
No Worries, No Worries. What's your favorite song by No Worries?
Ooh. I think it's called Where I Go.
No worries. Write that down.
Okay,
It's
I'm writing it down now.
Anderson Paak and Her.
Okay.
Yeah, so Where I Go. I love that song.
Interesting.
Oh,
Interesting.
no worries. Yeah, with the group with Anderson .Paak, they've been out for a minute now. It's
Yeah.
hitting me. Yeah, they had an album out like some years back. I was listening to them too. Yeah.
One just
Goodbye.
came out last year too. The other one is it's like 2016-ish, but this one just
Yeah,
came out.
yeah, it
So
is. I didn't know they had another album that came out. See,
yes.
then you introduced me to something new.
See, that's why I'm here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're gonna take just hang around just for a minute or so. Hey, Robert, and then Tiffany, I'm gonna see if I can pull that up. No worries. Huh? Interesting.
I don't know. You might need to find the edited version.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
She's in there. Just kidding.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And would you please come back?
Sure.
We love the conversation, and I think more of this needs to be talked about. We cover, and Robert and Nakaya and Tiffany can tell you, we do cover Black history quite a bit on this show. And since you were on, because normally I'll start it off with someone in our history that has a vocation or occupation, or had a vocation, occupation, or whatever related to the guest. But since you were coming on, we didn't have to necessarily do that today. But I want to thank you again, and tell your friends to tune in to Groove Swing Speaks every Tuesday, and also check